Bouncers of Reddit. Have you ever crossed paths with someone you've had to throw out of a club or bar? How was the experience? I was a bouncer years and years ago. I had to throw out a friend of mine. He didn't pick fights or anything, but was becoming abusive to the staff. When he sobered up he felt really bad about it and came back to apologize. I was interviewed by a guy we had tossed out. I still remember his name because he was such a douchebag that we banned him after this interaction, and we all kind of laughed at his name because it fit his behavior so well. Think Kyle Blake, not his real name, but he has two kind of bro names as first and last. Anyway, fast forward about a year, having finished school, and I'm at a staffing agency to interview for some crappy job. In walks Mr. Blake. Unfortunately, nothing super interesting happened, but throughout the interview he acted a little strange. I never found out if he recognized me, but I was not offered the job. Many years ago one of my relatives got traumatized in college by a horrific incident involving a bouncer and a patron. She was on a first date at a local sports bar, and an off-duty bouncer from a different bar or club that knew her date happened to walk in. He came over and said hi and joined them at the table. A bit later a guy the bouncer had ejected before walked up and shot him in the back of the head. My relative said it was an out of nowhere deafening boom and randomly the bouncer's head going flying forward to the table. A few seconds of shock and then people screaming and some running as it sets in. She was in nursing school at the time and mustered what little sense she could and yelled for someone to give her a shirt so she could put it on the back of his head while someone called 911. She told me he lived. Disabled for life but lived. She never went on a date with that first guy again. She knows it wasn't his fault, she just couldn't bring herself to do it. Edit. Thank you for the awards. It has been long enough that she seems to moved as on much as she can point L. I've bounced off and on for about 15 years in the same mid-sized city, about 150k people. One night as people were leaving this guy sucker punched another patron right inside the door. Several other people quickly got involved. I grabbed Mr. Sucker Punch and he spins around and squares up with me. I guess because I'm tall, 6'6", people always seem to try and rush me and wrestle me by the waist. Mr. SP was no different. We end up wrestling for a second before I finally get a solid grip on him. He's still trying to fight at this point. I ended up picking him up and throwing him through the exit doors, breaking one of them off the hinges. About a week later I'm out to eat with my mom of all people, and in walks Mr. Sucker Punch and sits down 2 tables over. I wasn't particularly worried about it, but I really didn't wanna have to beat someone up in front of my mom. About 5 minutes later I see him talking to the waitress, and she makes her way over to our table. That guy over there said you threw him through a door the other night at the bar. He wanted me to tell you he's sorry for being a dumb drunk. It happened fairly frequently with the regulars. As long as they weren't fighting, they'd be allowed back in the next night. Usually they were pretty embarrassed and apologize for being a drunken jackass. One time I did have to kick out a good friend because he got in a fight. He was in a bad place and was pretty embarrassed by the whole thing. We didn't really talk about it much afterwards. That was over a decade ago, and we are still friends today, and he's settled down and doesn't drink like he used to. Haven't been a bouncer in about 15 years, but funny story from when I was a guy I threw out and had to manhandle roughly. He was trying to hit me and other people, came back the next day, not to start trouble or get in again but merely to apologize and go. Seeing somebody genuinely sorry was a very rare experience. He said, and I quote, "I know I was a bit of a cunt and needed a slap. I know I'm banned. I was off my nut and just wanted to say sorry and no hard feelings." It stuck with me because he really meant it. It really doesn't go like that most of the time. Edit. I never really saw people from the clubs I worked at in my day-to-day life because the clubs I worked were way far from where I live. On purpose. I have a slightly relevant story. My brother went to uni in kind of a rough city. He was at a student bar and watched this guy get bounced. Well, he and the bouncer crossed paths again that night. The guy came back with a chainsaw. Needless to say he ruined the fun for everyone else, and cops were involved. Bouncer was not injured. Edit. Hamilton, Ontario, Canada for those asking. Did not expect this to blow up like this, but one of the commenters /you/trip doctor was there. What a twist. Not a bouncer, but a former bartender. I had to call the cops on a couple who had become angry and violent during a Sunday brunch. Both were arrested. The husband threw a glass at me, but the wife started swinging at the cop, so she got the worst of it. Rumor has it the husband was released later that day, but the wife spent a few days in jail. A few weeks later I was in Walmart and spotted the couple. The wife didn't see me, but the husband did. We both walked away in opposite directions without saying a word. But truth be told, I was terrified. Not a bouncer but an ex-manager, so still had to throw people out. Had one guy come back sober and apologize for his behavior and actually thank me for throwing him out. Apparently it was a wake-up call for him, not the first time he'd been an aggressive drunk. I didn't see him again after that, so not sure if he actually changed though. Edit. Thanks for the awards folks. Didn't expect this to blow up. I stopped working at that bar a few months after it happened, so even if he did go back, I wouldn't know. Hopefully he did get himself together. Not a bouncer, but have been kicked out. Was at Marley Bar in Newtown, Sydney with some friends in 2012. I had just bought my first drink of the night and had about 2 sips when a girl in my group, who had been drinking all night, started dancing near us. Eventually she bumped into me, causing my drink to slosh a bit and spill. Nothing too major. The bouncer noticed from all the way across the bar and pointed to me and beckoned me over. When I got over to this massive 6'5", 300-pound guy, he told me I had to leave because I was too drunk. I tried to explain to him that this was only my first drink and the girl bumped into me and he wasn't having any of it. I refused to leave since I had spent $15 on a drink I had taken 2 sips of and there was still plenty left. He took my drink and told me to wait there, returning with $15 and told me to get the fuck out of the bar. Reluctantly, but with my $15 back, I decided to leave and not cause trouble. When I got outside I called one of my friends and told him to meet me outside, where I told him what happened and asked him to switch shirts with me. I walked right up to the door and that same bouncer handed him my ID and got let in without him even recognizing me. Ex-pub manager here. One evening I had a group of drunken young idiots who started a fight in my pub, which needless to say ended up with them getting kicked out. Fast forward a few weeks, and I was having breakfast in a local cafe with one of my bar staff before opening when said group walked in and immediately recognized me. Cue the verbal abuse and threatening behavior. So I finished up and left, but it did not end there. My friend had managed to keep most of the in the cafe. He half knew them, but one strolled out straight up to me and dislocated my jaw with a right hook, followed by several kicks to the back as I went down. Needless to say, that day is why I no longer work in the pub trade. I've been a bouncer for almost 4 years, so I have some stories. I work in a small music venue/nightclub, and one night we hosted a rave night. Now, most of these guys are late 20s early 30s, and it seems like all of them have a lot of money. So obviously we were charging £20 on the door, since we could fill the place out, even if we were charging people a lot to get in. Now this one guy didn't want to pay that much and decided he would have a go of trying to sneaking in and telling me he already paid, which he obviously didn't, as I've been on the door all day and never left that spot. Anyway, he's arguing with me, throwing all his credit and debit cards at me, so I'm annoyed and go to pick them up until he slaps me on the top of the head with one of his cards. Now I pride myself on being calm and rarely ever having to put my hand on someone, but this guy went too far, so I put him in a headlock and dragged him out while his friends are laughing at him. Oh, did I mention to get into the out bar you have to go down a flight of stairs? Well, imagine how hard it is to get someone out who doesn't want to leave. Well, I and the other bouncer carried this guy up the stairs and dumped him outside. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, and shopping in Morrison's supermarket, and he spots me and approached me. He apologized and he wanted to make it up to me, so paid for my meal deal and shook my hand. So I would say that one went pretty well. I work the door at a punk dive bar. Big part of the job is bouncing people who've had too much with the attitude. It's cool, dude, we are all friends, but you've had enough tonight, come back tomorrow. 99% of people that's fine and it works. One dude who had probably smoked some meth That night was fixated on the bartender wearing a Superman shirt and ran home to shave his head and came back challenging him to a fight. I urged him outside to get ready for the fight with a pre-fight smoke. We smoked cigarettes and gently convinced him it was time to go home, which worked until he got halfway down the street and sprinted back and threw himself at the door screaming, "Superman! Superman! You can't hide from Lex Luthor, Superman!" One of the bartenders exited out of the side entrance and started yelling, "Holy shit, all the cops are coming. Everybody run," and the Jew disappeared. I saw him at the corner bodega the next afternoon and he looked at me and smiled and said, "I might have been a handful last night. Sorry, see you tonight." I used to work with a guy who was a bouncer, where he told me that he used to work at a club where a local gang would hang out. He said that he'd tolerate them as long as they didn't start any trouble, until one day one of them showed up with a serrated bread knife and threatened to stab him if he didn't let them through. I'm not a bouncer, but in my youth I got thrown out of a bar for taking a picture of my wife. We were young then, lol, and we're out drinking. They let women dance on the bar some nights. My wife starts doing it, so I snap a pic to show her after. Never in my life have I seen so many bouncers jump onto someone, me. I got kicked out. I was able to come back later after my wife confirmed it was me, her husband, taking the photo. Former barman had to encourage a lad to leave his work Christmas party after his elaborately choreographed karaoke rendition of Like a Virgin with very pointed references to an older lady. His boss, I suspect, did not go down well. Saw him the next morning working the till in the local supermarket. I've never seen someone's face go white, red, green so rapidly. I bounced for a few years in college. Welcome weekend, the weekend before classes start, would get pretty rowdy, and I had to kick a handful of people out. One guy in particular, I had an extended interaction with, where I threatened to choke him unconscious. It was a whole thing. Monday comes, he's the teacher's aide in the last class I had for my major. Syllabus day is bullshit. We just go over what the semester looks like and do some introductions. I was one of the last people to talk to the class, and as I got done, I'm walking back to my chair and the tar says something like, "Also don't get wild at the bar. He works there and will not be nice if you get him mad," and kinda laughed. The prof then made me come back up and have the tar tell his story, then me tell my side. Everyone had a good laugh and the dude ended up being a regular at the bar after that. I own a small restaurant with a bar and we have 286 people a few times a year. One of them was a regular who just got a little too racist. We all hated him anyways and were just waiting for him to screw up. He did. We had to drag him out. Total scene. I see him all the time. If he's drunk, he will talk shit to me, but I just walk away. He's a sad, drunk old man who's already filled with misery. Punching him in the mouth wouldn't solve anything. I'm not a bouncer, but I went to school with a guy who became one. Unfortunately for me, he thought I had been banned from the bar he worked at in a case of mistaken identity. But because he knew me, he'd always recognize me if I tried to go in and stop me. I ended up having to go in another time and meet the manager so they'd tell him to stop throwing me out. I'm not a bouncer, but I've been regular enough as a patron and performer at a particular bar to see people get bounced fairly often. It's the kind of place where most of the patrons are regulars, and a few of them just overindulge sometimes. Most of the time, it's not a problem. They sober up, and when they show up the next weekend and everyone's cool. There was one guy though that got a permaban. I'm not even sure what for, but he had been a problem in many ways for a while, and he showed up later with a knife. They had to lock the door and call police, who found him pounding on the door while everyone was still inside drinking and dancing. That guy eventually got his shit together, but not until spending a few stints in jail and having a couple of restraining orders against him. When I was freshly 21, I used to hang out at one of the local bars almost daily. My ex and I were going through a rough breakup and constantly getting coked up and then arguing or getting way too drunk and getting cut off by one of the bartenders. One day he cut me off and I called him a jackass and left no tip, which is extremely uncharacteristic of me. I stopped going to that bar for years because I was ashamed of myself. Cue several years later, and I'm starting a new bartending job, and lo and behold, it's the guy I called a jackass who's training me. Since then he's gotten me into another great job and we've actually become quite good friends. Might even start living together. It's a happy ending with a messy beginning. Regular bar hopper here. I got cut off and asked to leave a club a couple times for being too drunk. It was a regular party place for me. Get hired a couple years ago at a serving job and I'm talking to the manager, just having a chat after the job offer. We both realize we know the other. He was the bouncer who asked me to leave. Had a good laugh about it. We had friends in common too. It was a small city, 300,000 ish, a lot of students, and the restaurant/club scene wasn't huge. So me working in the industry also meant that the people I partied with were also the bouncers and bartenders that served us. Edited for clarity. When I worked as a bouncer, 90% of the people we tossed were just drunk or drunk and fighting, so we didn't care if you came back the next week. I was the mom of our crew for a large dance club, so I would banter with you about the week prior. But one chick was a total pain. When we tossed her BF, she went berserk, broke a beer bottle and actually gave me a little cut. Still have the scar. I recall bouncing her head off the door jamb on the way out. A year later we met at a party, both sober. She was super friendly, like where do I know you? The horror on her face when she realized how. I have thrown many people out of many bars in my lifetime. More often than not, if I encounter them in the wild, they will apologize for that night and whatever happened. I'd laugh, say no big deal, see you soon, and they would come back to the bar eventually. I'd wave, sometimes buy their first drink, and after that they were model patrons. People get drunk and sometimes are assholes. No need to hold a grudge for it. You show them respect while escorting them out, and show respect the next time you see them. You will rarely have an issue with them again. Went to a bar once with a few friends, and one of my friends was pretty drunk and put his head down on a table. I got up to go have a piss and get stopped by security who tell me to leave because I was falling asleep at a table when it clearly wasn't me. I used to bartend at the time, and about a week later the security guy who kicked me out came in and sat at the bar I was working at. I told our security to escort him out for falling asleep at the bar. Not a bouncer but a bartender. A local got super wasted and grabbed the other bartender, also the manager's wife, by the throat and tried to shove her down some stairs. Luckily she was very feisty and he was hammered, so he did not succeed. The manager was a 6 feet 5 inches ex-pro baseball player and grabbed the guy and threw him on the ground where he pretended to pass out. He kept popping his head up and looking around with one eye before going back to playing dead. The whole bar wanted manager to beat the snot out of the guy, but he called the cops and the ambulance, who convinced him he was not in need of medical assistance and removed him. Bartender, not a bouncer. I work at an event space and at a restaurant. I bartended a wedding at the event space and had to kick a guy out because he would not stop vaping inside and coming behind the bar to try and steal beers. It's a fucking open bar, dipshit. You don't have to steal. Got up and went to work my brunch shift the next morning and this same dipshit strolls in with his girlfriend and a couple others. He sits down and orders a Caesar from me. Does not recognize me though. I don't remember exactly how it came up, but at one point he tells me I'm a better bartender than the asshole bartender that kicked me out of my best friend's wedding for no reason. I said that was me. His friends laughed at him and called him a fucking moron. He finished eating very quickly and his girlfriend left me a very nice tip. It was normally not a big deal. I'm 6 feet 4 and played semi-pro football as a defensive nose tackle at the time, so most people were agreeable. It was also not a terrible area. One night a smallish dude who was not local came in and was being an asshole right off the bat. He was not drunk, maybe high. I was never sure about that, but he was not drunk. I approached him and knew immediately that something was off. He was pissed that the bartenders would not serve him, so I did what I normally did. I went to the bar, got a small glass of tap beer with a head on it, maybe 8 ounces, and came back to him. Finish this one on me and please go. Okay. Come back tomorrow and I will buy you another. Cool. He did not say anything. He took a sip of it, said thanks and walked out. He went to the bar 2 doors down and they refused to serve him, so he took out a tire repair tool, like an ice pick, and punched the bartender in the chest, piercing his heart. He died where he stood. The guy waited for the police and went without a fight. I quit bouncing that day.